Welcome to Sydney BackChat. We're still here. Got a great Airbnb sorted out by us, actually. BackChat brought to you by Fleet Network of season 2023. Thank you for your partnership. We're here with look, this is a bit of a different episode for us. I haven't stepped into the corporate land of late, but very excited to do so. Dave Matthews, CEO of the GWS Giants, is joining us here on BackChat. G'day, Dave.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Will. And Dan, great to see you guys.
Great to see you, mate. Now, I know you're a big fan of BackChat, but just to refresh your memory, we ask the same question to every guest we have on this podcast. We've spoken to Brownlow medalists, All Australians, Olympic medalists, people who've won the Ashes.
Yep.
You haven't done any of those, but you do run one of these sporting organisations. We want to know your greatest sporting achievement. Now, usually we caveat with, well, you can't do it in your chosen sport, but I'll allow you to give us your greatest sporting achievement, full stop. I know you're a sportsman growing up. I've seen a photo of you in a knee brace running around as a football player. I'm not sure what that was.
My greatest sporting achievement.
On the field. It's got to be sport.
So it's pretty simple. It's when I snapped my anterior cruciate, which led to my retirement, which started my sports management career. So I'm one of the few people who can say their greatest sporting achievement was actually doing their knee.
It's actually not too bad.
Set you on the right path.
Yeah, that's very good.
It did.
Now, I want to go back to
Got
the
me
start.
out of mediocrity.
I think it's worth touching on the fact there is a personal relationship here. You're a Geelong boy, Geelong College boy, and at some point in time there you met my elder brother, Jace, both best mates.
Yeah, that's right. I think I met Jace when we were both about 13, 14, maybe year 9 at Geelong College. And I can, our memory my memory of you, my first memory of you was being invited around by Jace to wet the baby's head. So I was 18 when you were born, if you recall, and I went around to your,
You remember that?
your house in Grovedale, and you don't remember that, but we met and immediately developed a great friendship. Jace and I have been best mates ever since, and I remember we enjoyed that night, the night of your birth, because one thing that I always try to think about is the beers we were drinking. I don't think they exist anymore. They've all gone out of production.
Mate, it was 1989.
Yeah, I know.
It's in the 80s.
You guys drank them all.
It was probably Tooheys Red or one of those weird Carlton draft things that they were trying to produce. But no, we've been great mates through Geelong College, and obviously since that day followed your journey with interest as well. Geelong
fan growing up, you two shared that, and certainly imparted that on me as a kid growing up. You've been big. You've been a big footy man, haven't you? I mean, I know you work in footy and you're leading an organisation now, but you're a Geelong fan growing up.
I definitely was. I mean, when Gary Ablett Senior arrived at Geelong, we were probably what was that, about 1984, I think. And in sporting terms, that's like having Michael Jordan lob into your backyard. So it was very hard not to become absolutely wrapped up in Geelong Footy Club and what he was doing. I probably already loved footy, but I think he created an excitement around the town that was second to none. I still think he's the best player I've ever seen, but certainly it was a great thing for Jason and I and a whole heap of the schoolboys. We used to just try to get along every week, and sometimes we'd even skip junior footy to go and watch him. So I reckon it led to a lot of dropout of footy in the local area because you just wanted to be there and see him play. And I remember queuing up in 1989, that year, queuing up for hours and hours trying to get finals tickets. Tickets have been a bit easier since, but in 1989 we queued up and watched that final series. And I remember thinking at the time, Geelong are going to just go on and win plenty, and then they didn't. So it was great. It was great childhood growing up in Geelong, as you know. Geelong College, a great school, and growing up in the Ablett era was fantastic.
Before we go any further, Dave, of course, BackChat's powered by Fleet Network for season 2023. We always ask people as well their first car. Do you remember what your first car was that you had?
Yeah, I think I was never given a car outright by mum and dad, but I think I used to drive my grandfather's Volvo or my dad's Mazda 323.
Was it light blue? Am I making that up?
Yeah, making that up. Yeah. Both of those cars were white. No, I don't think we've ever had a light blue vehicle.
I feel like there was a light blue car driving in and out.
Volvo guy.
Originally, yeah, that was probably my starting point. Yeah,
the origins. So, I mean, talking about starting points, people see you now. You're the CEO of an AFL club. What's the career progression? How does that start? Like, where does that start for Dave Matthews out of school?
Yeah, so I like a lot of people, I went and did commerce, mainly just to keep my options open. I just it was down the road at Deakin University, and I was still living at home, and it's a 12-hour-a-week course, so you can sleep in and be on the pool table by about 3 p.m. So doing a commerce degree was I just sort of followed quite a lot of my mates who were thinking, let's do a sort of broad business degree and see where that gets us. As I said, I was injured playing footy, which was not a bad thing, because then the local footy league, the Geelong Footy League at the time, were looking for their first ever full-time general manager. They used to have like a voluntary secretary and treasurer who were getting honorariums, and they decided to put somebody in. And and I think I was 21 at the time, so I was coming pretty cheap, and took the job. I took the job. A guy called Don Matheson, who was a legend in Geelong, who's a World War II veteran. He was 78 years old, voluntary chairman of the Geelong Footy League. He interviewed me in his shed and said, do you want to try to use your commerce degree and come and work in sport? And so, I just grabbed that with open arms. Probably thought it was a little bit of a risk in terms of being the first ever full-time employee, how that might work out, but it turned out pretty well.
Did you meet him volunteering at a radio station?
I did. I think when there was a teacher out at school, a guy called Jeff Peel, who's a very good friend of ours, and he gave me the opportunity to do some special comments on a few games. And I interviewed the president of the Geelong Footy League, Don Matheson, one day, and afterwards he said, why don't you come and meet me and let's talk about your career. So, yeah, I did a little bit of that, and then ended up working the Geelong Footy League for 3 or 4 years, and then ended up with a job running Victorian country footy operations for the AFL, working out of the MCG, which is a bit like George Costanza working at the Yankees, really. It's a privilege to turn up every day. And then from there, I got a job. Wayne Jackson put me in charge of creating and nationalising Auskick, which became an executive role under Demetro, and then into the Giants.
Yeah, so that time at the AFL is, now I need to get this right, General Manager of National and International Development.
Yeah.
Is that right?
It is.
Did you have a plaque for that? I've been quite long.
Pretty grandiose statement, isn't it? I mean, the international side of it, you wouldn't say it's booming, but no, it was a great opportunity. I just remember at the time, like, we had Vic Kick, and we all had an aspiration to turning it into a national product and taking it around Australia, and it's been such a great program for the game, and a lot of sports have sort of copied that. But then to take on a role, particularly under Andrew Demetro, that was talent pathways, coach education, Auskick, participation generally, and then Indigenous programs and other things. It was a great time. And then during that time, we also created 2 new clubs in the Gold Coast and the Giants.
Are you telling me that my Sunday mornings coaching 5-year-olds at the moment, sometimes allegedly hungover, is your fault?
I think it is. Yeah, I think it is. I can imagine how grumpy you'd be on a Sunday morning. I mean, I would have thought personally that you'd be at church, not at Auskick. But anyway,
thank you, Dave.
What was the international part of your job? What were you doing?
Yeah, it's a good question. It really started from the point of view that all over the world, that there's expat Australians particularly, but there's also people who've just fallen in love with the game, and the starting point was to try to support or motivate people who wanted to run the game. And like for instance, there's a community competition in Denmark that's basically all run by locals. There's 48 clubs in the US. There's footy in London, and there's a mix of whether it's locals or expats. And so the first thing we wanted to do was just try to encourage them and say, we're going to provide you some resources just like we'd provide to a country footy club in Victoria. And then there was other things we did where we tried to take events. We played a game. We played Brisbane versus Melbourne at the World Expo in Shanghai. We did those sorts of things. I've been to a couple of the USAFL national championships, one in particular in Las Vegas, which the Las Vegas Gamblers won the Division 3 title. That was a highlight, that event. But I think the game we talk a lot about the AFL and the wealth, and the game's built on volunteers, and they're all over the world. So if we've got the best sport in the world, then you just try and encourage people to play it and promote it.
You didn't have to do that famous speech. I think it was Wayne Jackson, was it? It might not have been Wayne. Got up in front of, looked like a cafe in America, and basically said the AFL is just like a big game of chasey or hide and seek. Have you seen that clip? I wish I had it with me.
I have. No, I have seen it. But we had a better quote a few years ago. The US ambassador for Australia, a guy called Jeffrey Bleish, he came to a lot of our games in Canberra, and the first game he came to, he actually had been on the phone to President Obama on the way up the stairs. And he said, I've just been talking to the president. He wanted to know what I was doing on the weekend. I said, oh, yeah, of course. And he said, I'm going to go and watch this Aussie Rules. And Obama said to him, you tell those Australians they've got a better game than we do, because ours is extreme violence interrupted by committee meetings. But I prefer theirs, which looks like a prison riot where you throw the ball in. So I think that's probably good. A better descriptor.
That's very good. You mentioned Andrew Demetrio in that somewhere through the line. He was a real role model, and really believed in you from quite early at the time of the AFL. You took a spot on the senior executive with Gill, Ben Buckley,
Andrew Dillon. Yeah.
He had a big influence on you personally, career-wise?
Yeah, absolutely did. I mean, any young person, I think, coming through any organisation needs opportunity, and Andrew Demetrio certainly gave me a very good one, and all those other names you mentioned, like Andrew Dillon, Gil McLaughlin, myself, Andrew Catterall, a number of us, we're all basically 30 and put on the exec team for Andrew Demetrio, who was sort of young and hungry, and he's fantastic to work for. He's such a strong leader, and he also, he'd appoint you, and then he'd have the self-restraint to just let you have a go at the job and get on with it. And he was a bold thinker, so he backed us in on big decisions and all sorts of things, whether it was a decision to try to recruit Carmichael Hunt to try to disrupt the market, or follow that up with Falau, or start the 2 new clubs. He's a fantastic leader, and someone I keep in touch with because he's a great mentor.
Did you have to check off with him bringing in the work experience kid in about 2003 to the AFL? My first job, Dan, was underneath Dave Matthews at the AFL.
That's actually true, isn't it? I'm trying to think.
Sounds like nepotism, to be honest.
I'm trying to think.
Well, I guess you're not family, but
I wouldn't say you made a significant contribution, but I remember you coming in.
You had me doing paperwork, basically.
You didn't have the beard, and you had a lot more hair, and basically, if I recall, you just had a lot of selfies with the girls around the office. And it wasn't them asking you; it was the other way around. But no, I remember that well. Work experience. I mean, it is, and you'd remember this when you walk into AFL House for the first time as a young person who loves footy. It's a pretty big thrill, isn't it?
It was amazing. I remember clipping up vision of the AIS at the time. Kevin Sheehan. Yeah, Kevin Sheehan was head of that department, and he put me with him for a day, and he clearly didn't want to clip up the goal kicking, so he put me in an office clipping it up, and I clipped up the likes of Jared Ruffhead, Lance Franklin, but 16, 17-year-old versions of those guys. And I remember different conversations along the way, and this isn't on Kevin, certainly not, but at that stage I was still just a medium-sized, bit lanky, like my footy, not very good at it. And I remember different conversations around that week with different people, and one of them was around me, it's a bloody tough ask to get into the AFL. Not many people do it. Yeah. Effectively inferring, look, may as well go get commerce degree out. And I had a few of those over the time through that period. Terry Whelan didn't pick me in the schoolboys team, and not that it's on them because there is a lot of people, but that there were some elements of my time at the AFL that was inspirational from this is how it works, great, but also people not thinking I could make it.
Yeah.
Was there any elements for you going through your career like that, or were you a straight line, go and get it, don't worry about what people think?
No, I think you need people to support you and back you in to give you some confidence. I mean, I guess the people who've given me the most confidence through my career are Mum and Dad and my 2 brothers who, you bounce a lot of things off, and mum and dad in particular always just encourage you to go and attack things. But, one thing I noticed when you first got to the AFL was it probably really did matter whether or not you'd actually played or whether or not you'd had some relative who played even helped you. So there's aspects of, there was a far smaller organisation then than it is now. And but what you're describing, the talent pathway, generally we celebrate the stories of success, but you don't hear too much about the young players who fall away through just missing out on an opportunity. And it's a bit of a knife's edge, I reckon, particularly with the draft age the way it is. And we've seen that over the years that there's a lot of players who need that second opportunity, and I think that's the same for anyone in life. We're not at our best at 18, whether that you're an athlete or whether you're an administrator. So, it's all about opportunity and perseverance, I think.
What's it like with your brother now? He's quite involved in another club.
Yeah.
Do you have a bit of rivalry? Is it friendly? Do you talk shop when you catch up? Or
Yeah, we do. I mean, so he's at Richmond on the executive, and we jokingly have a Matthews Cup. And it's hard for him because I'm the favourite son. So mum and dad barrack for the Giants and absolutely hate Richmond. Mainly because Richmond, I feel for Simon. He doesn't get on aeroplanes very often because they played 22 weeks at the MCG. So, when we met in that grand final, we had obviously gone in fairly beaten up and we're up against it. But I don't think he's forgiven mum and dad for wearing giant scarves to the game. So,
any friendly wagers during the season? When you guys play each other.
It's pride.
Well, it's probably no point because he just doesn't pay up. So, we've got a good. We actually do love playing. The boys love playing against Richmond, and the Matthews Cup's been early years. It was heavily one way going to him, but we've dragged a few back.
So you're very much a local Geelong boy, a Victorian. Proud Victorian, Dan. Too many West Australians in this room for my liking. But at some stage, you moved to Sydney and a little bit developing the game to start with, but then you effectively approached for the role to be CEO of an expansion club. Before getting into what that actually involves logistically, what's that like from a decision-making process? Your family based in Melbourne, moving them to a new city, intimidating?
Yeah. Look, it is. Well, we saw it as an adventure, and I'm sure that's how you've probably embraced getting drafted across the West Coast. Dimitro at one point just said, look, would you do your role out at Sydney for the next 3 years? And at the time, we had young children. You probably thought it was hard to move, but it's easier to move with young kids in actual fact because you meet more people. And so we were only coming up for 3 years and been here for 13, 14 now. So I can't see us moving south again. I'm a bit like probably you experience in Perth. The weather's just too good, and I get a bit flat when I go back to Melbourne. I know they talk about putting a roof in over the Tassie Stadium. I'd put a roof over Melbourne completely, I reckon, because it's just it's and that miserable drive in from the airport. I find a bit depressing. But Sydney's weather, the environment of Sydney, the challenge of Sydney. This is the most competitive sporting market in the world in a lot of ways. So it was coming up for 3 years. 3 years in, just before, I think it was 2011, just before the Giants' first season, they wanted to make a change in terms of giving Dale Holmes a bit of a break, who'd done an enormous job getting it to a certain stage. So I went in for 3 months and then 6 months, and they've now been there for 11 years. And it's been a great decision. And even the difference between working at head office and working at a club is really stark. So enjoyed it.
I've got a lot of questions, to be honest. Operating in that realm for the first time, effectively, you're starting a football club. You're not going into a role where there's 100 years of history, fan base, team song, team colours. You're walking into a new entity, effectively.
Yeah, that's right. Quite apart from being an AFL club, it's a start-up organisation. So everything that goes with that is flawed assumptions, financial models that Dimitro once sent me on a course to Columbia Uni, and I remember the professor stood up at the start of it and he said, write this down. Right? We all get our pens, he says. just remember an Excel spreadsheet is nothing but a quantification of your fantasies. And I've gone, so we've all written it down. And I remember looking at the business model we wrote for Gold Coast and the Giants, and that's exactly what it was. I was at the AFL at the time, and you can make an Excel spreadsheet look like anything. You know, we're going to be profitable at year 5, and we're going to sell, 36 corporate suites. We're going to sell those out, even though the stadium only ever built 12. So there's all these crazy things that you think about, and as you go back through it, you look at the initial plans for the club and where we've outperformed, where we've maybe underperformed, and where we haven't had the chance to get certain things right. But it's a blank sheet of paper, as you say. Dale Holmes did an enormous job getting things like a Canberra deal in place for 10 years and getting Giant Stadium's funding sorted out, and I think we chose great colours. He led that. I think my first day was Melbourne Cup Day 211, and the first draft, which Toby Green and Canelio and others were taken in, was only a couple of weeks away, and we didn't have a mascot, we didn't have a song, and working with Kevin Sheedy was brilliant at that time, because he's like, you got to make these decisions, you got to get these decisions right. And there's a famous Australian band, the Cat Empire, and a trumpet player in that is a guy called Harry Angus. Harry Angus took it upon himself to write our theme song, and he emailed it in to the AFL, and it sat in someone's inbox for I don't know how long, and then he emailed it again, and finally, through a mate of a mate, got it to a guy called Joseph Laposta, who was working at AFL New South Wales, and remember him coming to me going, look, I know you've got to choose a song. Harry Angus has submitted this song. What do you think of it? You need to at least respond to him. And that, I think that's become one of the great songs in the competition.
So this is the... He
wrote that? He wrote that, yeah.
Wow.
That's cool.
He wrote that, and he came to the club one day, very weirdly, his mum and dad, turns out, worked at Deakin University.
Geelong University.
Yeah, and they'd asked my mum and dad to babysit him one night, and I think I was there, and we had this weird connection that we chatted about. But he came along and bought his trumpet, and he'd written the lyrics, and he sat around in a circle with the likes of Kevin Sheedy, Mark Williams, Luke Power. There was a number of the players all sat in a circle. He said, look, the number one thing we're going to work on is guys need to be able to sing this. I can sing it, I can play it, I can record this. But if you can't sing it, then this is a failed course of action, basically. So he ran this workshop just singing this song, and I think it's Luke Power's credited with putting the words "Never Surrender" into it, because it was basically that part of the song was just an instrumental, and he and Mark Williams and others were talking about the yellow and black in the Richmond song, that you got to have something that you can really belt out or the crowd can get into. So yeah, those sort of decisions, those opportunities, writing a song like that, or receiving a song like that, you go, gee, there's some. What are the great decisions we've made? What are the decisions, if we had our time again, you might change? But it's been good fun.
You mentioned Sheedy saying you got to get that right. Well, I mean, in hindsight, thinking about now, he's right, isn't he? Like, he must have had a big impact on the fabric of the footy club. And is that why someone like him was there, given his experience in footy?
Yeah, I think the decision, and he and I chatted about it. We were flying back from Darwin one day, and I was still with the AFL, and I said, what are you going to do? Essendon had just moved him on, and he was working as an AFL ambassador at the time, and we talked a bit about Barassi going to the Sydney Swans way back. I said I should talk to Dale Holmes and Demetrio about whether or not, should we consider this option of you coming up coaching? And he was all in, because he's just, I think he's the greatest marketer the game's ever had. And I think he gets underestimated by some people within the industry in a way that probably sells him short at times. I think we've been the beneficiaries of a lot of the things that Kevin Sheedy's done. So when he came up, one of the things I think that he brought immediately was, because he had nothing to prove, he was happy to play the kids and pursue a strategy of, we're going to develop young talent, and eventually they'll grow up to be able to compete properly. So he wasn't worried about wins and losses. He was more worried about winning quarters.
Right.
And you could get beaten by 140 points on a weekend, and he'd walk through the business side of the club Monday morning, and he'd be just lifting everyone's spirits. So he's a whole of club coach. He was just he was outstanding to work with, and he just, I remember when Dimitri asked me to go in, I said to Sheeds, "What do I need to know here?" He said, "Well," what first thing you got to do is you got to make sure that the players want to turn up for work, because they're playing 50 hours of footy a year, and the rest of it's preparation and anxiety. So get it right." You're like, okay. So it was great. It was brilliant.
How much did you learn from the Gold Coast coming into the competition? Was that like a nice building block for you guys to work on bringing the Giants in?
Yeah, I think one of the things that, whether it was a learning or just a realisation, is that I think a lot of the everyone seems to think that there's this idea that the Giants just wanted to build on young talent and didn't try to pursue mature age players, which is false in part. But what happened, because the Gold Coast came in and Gary Ablett Jr. was almost one out, I think a lot of the players that might have been considering an opportunity with the Giants sort of looked at Ablett and thought, okay, this is difficult, just being pretty much the one-man band that he was. They're different. We came in at similar times, 1 year apart, but they're different challenges. There's more of a natural AFL market on the Gold Coast, so we knew we had to do things differently. And I think we also made decisions a bit differently based on experience. We got Kevin Sheedy, we got Gubby Allen, and then we went and got some effectively playing coaches. We got Chad Corns, Dean Brogan, James McDonald, Luke Power. So we had this core of almost playing coaches in and around them. And then I think what Silvani and Gubby Allen did really well was get some guys that weren't that far ahead in age of our draftees. So the uncontracted players they secured: Callan Ward, Phil Davis, Reece Palmer, Tom Scully. Davis and Ward in particular, only being sort of 3 years older than the draftees, proved to be exceptional acquisitions, great leaders, still there today. So, yeah, I think you do. We still compare notes with the Gold Coast quite a lot in terms of what have we got in common, what haven't we got in common. But in some ways, we probably more look to the Sydney Swans about what their journey's been.
I've got lots of different angles to go with this, but let's sort of stay with performance. We spoke to Toby Green yesterday. Spoke about his career, and you say he was in your first draft in 2011. Effectively, he played in your first game, was a midfielder, all of those things. He won 5 games in his first 50 games.
Yeah.
So that development with those senior players. But from that point on, effectively, 2016, so that was in sort of the first 4 or 5 years. 2016, you make a prelim. 2017, you make a prelim. 2018, semi-final, lost a tough one. 2019 grand final. So although it was that early period was difficult, losing, you've been a successful club. You made finals 5 of the 10 years you've been in the competition, effectively, 5-11. What are your reflections on that period, that difficult period of losing, moving into a success? That's a successful period of winning.
Yeah, it is. Look, I think it's built on people like Toby Green. I think it's one of the things that we probably particularly early on drafted people with great character and resilience, and they all lived together initially at a place called Breakfast Point on the Parramatta River, which is almost like a US college style setup. It was a place that Kevin Sheedy's wife Geraldine decided they thought would be good for them to live at, and then when they moved in there, Kevin Sheedy and Gubby Allen decided they basically should put all the young players in together. So there was this collegiality amongst the playing group that I think held them together. 2012, our first year, was really exciting. 2013, I reckon, was demoralising for a lot of them. And Toby and others would reflect on that. And I think Phil Davis and others. And I remember having conversations with players at the time saying, is this going to work? Yeah, will we survive here?
Because you thought you'd be better and you won 1 game.
Yeah, so we won 2 in the first year, one in the second. 2013, you could see some sort of green shoots. 2014, 15. We probably missed 2015 after some significant injuries mid-year. We're probably heading towards the finals. And then 2016, the likes of Steve Johnson came come to the club and complimenting the forward line, what he sure was giving us in the back line. That was a very exciting year. We were absolutely flying, got knocked over by the Bulldogs. And as you say, and our financial performance correlated with on-field performance, which is not surprising, but it's a really fine line when if you miss the 8, it's a difficult business to run. But yeah, we made finals 16, 17, 18, 19, hit budget all those years. Coming out of 19, you think, right, we're on here. We've got the right mix and we know where we're heading. And then COVID hit, and we were effectively out of Sydney and therefore Canberra for a couple of years. So it's been, I think, we're a young club. We've played 80 odd games at home. So we've still got a lot to look forward to, and I think this year's been very good so far in terms of showing people what we're capable of.
In terms of moments, mate, I want to show you this. Tell me what this felt like. See you there off to the side. That's in the race at the prelim final 2019. What's that feeling like?
Oh, it was amazing. I mean, you've experienced it. You've experienced more than that. But, to get there and under a bit of adversity was just incredible. And that the backstory to that a little bit is we got a fairway in front, and halfway through the last quarter, we're absolutely surrounded by Collingwood supporters. And I just couldn't stand it anymore. And so I went and got in I think they kicked a goal, and I went and rushed and got in an elevator and went straight down to the rooms and put the game on my phone, which is, when you look at it, it's pretty pathetic. Because I should have just sat there and ridden it out. And then with a couple of minutes, I get down there and I go, what am I doing? Just get up the race. I didn't expect those boys to be in the race. I didn't know where they were, because I think we'd arranged a suite or a spot for them all to sit. And then I walked up the race and there they were. And I don't know, it just worked out pretty well, because then we hung on and it was an incredible feeling. And then grand final week, I mean, I know the result didn't go our way and was difficult in terms of a bit of a blowout by the end, but that week and the way it engaged the people of Sydney and the way the Orange Army came to Melbourne, it was a great period regardless of the result.
Yeah, I
was going to say, you see AFL CEOs around the league, and some of them act differently. Some of them are, you never see their faces. Some of them are very upfront. You are pretty passionate in that moment and up and about. Is that how you sort of always carried yourself? Like, is there any element of you like, I should be a bit more proper to sit down? I don't know. It's good, but you don't see it very often.
We like it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I think it's an emotional game. Like, I think one of the things that's happened with the AFL over the journey is the industry talks far too much about money and profits and business principles, and business lingo's crept into it. In the end, you're running a footy competition, or you're running a footy club, and we're all in it because we're emotionally connected to the game. So one of the reasons I've preferred working at a club to head office, because of that emotional connection. I actually like the roller coaster of the win-loss. And I remember at the time in, say, 2013, when we were really at a bit of a rock bottom spot in terms of morale and confidence and where the club might have been heading, you remember thinking, getting a guy like Callan Ward, you just wanted to do everything you could to make Callan Ward a premiership player. Same with Phil Davis. Same with the players who've stuck with us, like Cornelio, Toby Green, Nick Haynes. There's a number of them who started the club and are still there. So, it's not hard to get motivation out of the fact that you're trying to build something special, and you want to see people like that rewarded. Yeah, so I do get... I'm very emotionally connected to it. I think, and that's played out in a variety of ways, whether it's challenging tribunal hearings or occasionally. Having come from head office, one of the tensions has been at what stage do you cut the umbilical cord? And where you're sitting on the other side of the table and they don't like being criticised and you don't like being hard done by. So there's this tension that emerges. But I make no apologies at all for being fully invested for the club and for the fan base we've built.
To talking about that fan base, like I remember early days, you're not getting many people to games. There was a group of fans dressed as monks.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Well, there's a great mate of mine and your brother Jace is a guy called Eric Johnson. He's an American who moved out here many, many years ago now, and he's just one of those people who whatever his mates are doing, he gets behind them, and he just loved our colours, the orange, and decided, you're having trouble forming cheer squads, why don't I just put something together? And I said, when we played in Melbourne, he was living in Melbourne at the time. So he developed this thing, the Mad Monks, and they'd come along and dress up in sort of skin-coloured swim caps and all sorts of stuff. And I think it culminated in our very first game at Geelong. Eric and Jace and about 25 blokes from Geelong College formed our cheer squad and held up our banner, and they were helping out. We got a great cheer squad, by the way, and it formed really early, but it was quite small in numbers when you were travelling. And basically there's all these Geelong College guys who barrack for Geelong sitting behind the goals in these mad monk outfits, drinking beer, having a good time. So, it's been a weird and wonderful journey.
Yeah, it has. Back in footy realm, did you ever try to recruit me? Was I ever on it? Was my magnet ever on a list of people that I could have got to the GWS Giants?
Yeah, it was because you and I had a beer. I'm trying to think what occasion was it. And I said to you, how do you enjoy the weather in Perth? Because I think Sydney's got a similar climate. And we need someone to come and help Phil Davis with Buddy Franklin. But you were pretty settled by then.
Yeah.
I think you'd maybe just about to have your first child. I actually always wondered, like, we've dealt with this thing called the go home factor, whether it's real or not real. I think it's real for some people and not for others. But I've always looked at your journey and wondered whether you felt that at all. I don't think we've ever really discussed it, but did you? Or?
Yeah, I reflect on it a lot. We did have a beer together. It was my dream team breakup, and you were in Geelong doing something else, and Jace brought you over for a beer. And then I had another conversation with you, and I reflect on this one a bit. I was driving my car, and you rang me in. It was just a conversation. It wasn't anything other than that. And you said how I was going. You were checking up on me, basically. Yeah. And it was actually the pre-season of 2015. I'd just been dropped in the pre-season, wasn't getting a game. And I wasn't in a good way. I must have spoken to Jason, then spoke to you, then very quickly gave me a call. Yeah. And it's a bit of a turning point, right? Because I wasn't getting a game, but I've always, to answer your question, I've always had a certain sense of loyalty. Not one club player. That doesn't mean much to me. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but certainly do respect, appreciate, and have a loyalty to people that have backed me in. And I talk about the time when I spent as an AFL as a 15-year-old. But right at that moment, I could have very easily said, and you could have very easily made it happen. Yeah, mate, get me over. I'm done. I'm not getting a game. But I really felt like it would have been maybe an easier way to go and get a game. I was competing against Eric McKenzie, Mitch Brown at the time. Yeah. And within 2 weeks of that conversation, they both did their ACLs. And I was basically like they were forced into believing in me again, basically, and we made a grand final on the back of what we did as a backline, and that's not overstating what we did that year. It was the Weagle's web that was reported in the media, but basically we just played this defensive structure. We helped each other out, and it was honestly sort of like a 2 week sliding doors moment that they don't do their ACLs. Then who knows what that could have looked like, but the going home factor was never. Even contract time, I'm homesick. That I never played that card ever. Yeah, and it never has been. I mean, I'm from Geelong, mate. Unless I was at the Geelong Footy Club, I would have been away from home anyway. Being an hour away in Melbourne is just, it's not that much further, 3 hours on a plane to Perth, is it?
It's funny the go home thing because, some managers, there's some great managers in the comp, there's some really average ones, and some of them will play a go home factor card, and you go, well, you actually don't know your player better than I do. He's reasonably comfortable, so what are we trying to do here? Because it's in his interest to try to hold the list together, but it's funny when when recently when I was down seeing Jason, there was a heap of Geelong College boys, and we were playing Geelong the next day. It was Toby Green's 200th, and I still get questions from schoolmates like, gee, you must be torn tomorrow. I know you work at the Giants, but deep down you're still barrack for Geelong. I go, are you fucking serious? You guys deluded? I mean, you work for Coca-Cola. Are you quietly barracking for Pepsi? So it's like just a stupid question. And what happens over time, I reckon, too, is you tend to end up, if you're getting to know people, you end up starting barrack for the individual almost. I've followed your career closely, and every time you're playing Geelong, if you're not playing the Giants, I'm barracking for you. Yeah. I'm wanting you to succeed. One of the great days in my AFL journey was watching you towel up the Goey and win the premiership, and then drinking till 4 a.m. with Jace, and then getting up at 9 a.m. to have a Bloody Mary. And I think you were probably still out, but that's the reality of it. That you get to know people like Callum Ward. Footy's allowed me to get to know some of the best people I've met in life, and that's both men's and AFLW now. But Toby Green, Stephen Cornelio, Callum Ward, Davis, you could go on and on. All you want to do, what really drives you, is trying to enable them to have the sort of success you've enjoyed. That's what I want to be able to do.
What's the biggest challenges of a startup expansion club? What do you look at when you walk into that footy club?
It's a fan base because you're in behind enemy lines. The AFL, I think, in Melbourne in particular, exists almost in a vacuum that they don't really even acknowledge or understand any competition to in a lot of ways. And we're trying to do almost what the Melbourne Storm did, or even if you started, second NRL club in Melbourne, you're trying to. It's a big market, but you've still got to try and win share. So, being only a young club, it stands to reason that we've got a young fan base. And we're impatient to try to build that and fill the stadium up. And you're competing against clubs that are 130 years old, 150 years old. They've had generations of support, particularly in Melbourne. And the journalists that make me sort of laugh the most are the ones who sort of take some cheap shot about the crowds of expansion clubs. I mean, firstly, they're the beneficiaries of jobs in an industry that's pretty good. And secondly, they'll probably barrack for clubs that are 150 years old, and we're trying to build a fan base also. This is an interesting one, I reckon, that we play live against the gate. So when Jason and I started barracking for Geelong, you couldn't watch it live on TV. You had to go. And so clubs like Collingwood have had 130, 140 years of generational history of you've got to go to actually watch this team live. And then it's only the last 20, 30 years where games are live against the gate. So in short, it's saying we've got this unbelievable game. The game's 150 years old. We've only really been having a crack at Western Sydney for 10 or 15 years. How do we build that stadium up? And it's interesting, Will, because you've been at West Coast. My view is this club at some point will be like Geelong Footy Club in terms of reserve seat memberships. There won't be enough seats at Giants Stadium. We'll have to get a bit bigger. And in 10, 15, 20 years' time, it could be as big as West Coast Eagles.
List management, trade acquisition, acquiring players, both, retaining guys on your list, because you've had some guys taken away. It's very public.
Yeah.
You've acquired some, which you've spoken about, but there's been big names that have been linked that haven't been signed, etc. What's some sort of insights you can give from both CEO's point of view, but inside a footy club, how those ruminations go about?
Well, you've got to make great decisions. Obviously, you've got to get decisions right, and it's made harder by virtue of the fact you're selecting 18-year-olds and trying to forecast future talent. I think we've generally done well. We've generally retained the players we've wanted to keep. There's always a lot of discussion about the sorts of players we've lost. There's probably only one or two come to mind that would have liked to have really held on to. Others you're juggling, saying, well, we've got a pretty strong portfolio. When you're playing finals 4 or 5 years in a row, you should be under salary cap pressure, and you should be under pressure to retain all the players. And so, yeah, it's complex in some respects, but it's also just a judgment call from people like Jason McCartney and now Adam Kingsley saying, where do you place your bets? Do you prioritise Tom Green over other midfielders? Where do you see Finn Callaghan? And then, it's incumbent upon us to make sure the culture's one where they want to stay, they enjoy living in Sydney. It's really fundamental to us that they see a prospect of success. I think one thing we've learned off the Swans is that they've defied gravity and continue to compete, and I think that's helped them hold their club together or hold their list together. But Sydney's a great place to work and play. Our stadium's smack bang in the middle of central Sydney. Players have got a great lifestyle, great opportunity, and that's what we continue to sell. But we're still really impatient to win one.
What involvement is it like a collective sort of situation when it comes to list management and things like that? Is there one person that gets the final say, or do you as a CEO get involved in the football decision making, or are you pretty hands off with it?
I make all the good decisions, they make all the bad ones. That's probably the best way to look at it. There's another one of my favourites from journos. They talk about CEOs getting too involved in football. It's a football club. You're the CEO of a football club, so it would stand to reason that you get involved from time to time in football decisions. I've got a lot of confidence in Jason McCartney and his team, but I think it's just a situation where you play a role if there's a role there to be played. If I can help convince Toby Green that this is where his future lies, or if Leon Cameron's better to do that, or Adam Kingsley or whoever, it's just sort of horses for courses a little bit. But we all get very involved. I mean, the economic engine, now talking in business terms, but the economic engine of our footy club's our football performance. And your football performance is predicated on the talent you've got. So you often look at it as what's your, in simple terms, what are the assets you're acquiring? What do you need to retain? So I think everyone plays a role.
I think it sort of sounds like the Giants and Gold Coast and probably a few other clubs around need to be approached and run a little differently to others, given the history and all the challenges we've just spoken about. Would it be fair to say that you've had a fair American influence on the way you look at things, maybe as a leader, and if that flows on to what happens at GWS, or is that not correct? I don't know where that sits.
Yeah, I think so too. I mean, we're just in our purpose, in our stated purpose. It actually starts with to create a club like no other. So the one thing about the Giants that we realised really early on is we're not trying to be Richmond, we're not trying to be Collingwood, or you can't just take. In some ways, they have almost a maintenance plan rather than a growth plan. This has got to be. We're still in just coming out, I guess, of startup phase. So you've got to be able to do things differently and think differently. And we've probably been put here to try to disrupt the market and create an AFL audience. So there's a number of things we look at. We looked at the NHL, just got the team that just won that. There's a startup expansion team placed in the desert. You look at the way the branding journey of some of the American clubs has gone. We've all been watching Wrexham recently, thinking, do we look for some private owners and build out a documentary? And there's all sorts of things that I think we want to contemplate and think about that traditional AFL clubs don't.
You love your travel. I know you've been to some big sporting moments, some big events across the journey. Do a few stand out to you along the way?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, as you say, like it's just, and it's a combination of we all love sport. I do, and love a variety of sports, and if you can combine that with a bit of travel, I've been pretty fortunate in what I've been able to get to and see. I think the best sporting event outside of AFL that I've seen is probably the 2000 Olympics and the Cathy Freeman final, which I watched with your brother. And then offshore, I got a younger brother Tim, older brother Simon. We took our dad for his birthday to a US Masters, which you go with high expectations. I reckon they're exceeded. It's unbelievable. It looks great on TV. It's even better there. I've been to a few Super Bowls, which have been brilliant. Probably in the category of, like a lot of Australians, where the halftime entertainment's more entertaining than the game itself, which I reckon's the reverse for the AFL. I don't think we should get too worried about that. We've got a better product, I reckon.
That's a good point.
I've got an opportunity to take Kevin Sheedy over to meet Sir Alec Ferguson. We went to a derby, Man City versus Man United.
Yes.
I think you might have spoken to him about it.
Yes.
And yeah, Sheedy was always, he's famous for saying that there's only three people who have done 27 years. It's Kevin Sheedy at Essendon, Alec Ferguson at Man United, and Nelson Mandela on Robben Island. And so he had this opportunity to go and meet Ferguson, and so to be on a fly on the wall for that and see a big derby, it was a great game.
Wasn't there some people in that box?
Yeah, there was. That was the one on the way over where we were being hosted by Nike in their suite, and they said it was actually, the game was at Man City. They said there's a chance Liam Gallagher from Oasis is going to be in the suite.
Yes.
So do you want me to tell this story?
Yes.
So I said to Sheeds, we settled into our seats on the plane. They said, you might want to just let him know because he can be a bit erratic, a bit unpredictable. He may not even turn up, but...
Liam or Kevin?
Liam, both. So he said, just let him know that. So I told Sheeds, I said, look, Liam Gallagher from Oasis may well be in this suite. I'd never heard of him. And I said, look, Oasis when you were coaching in the early 90s, ask Hurd and Lloyd and Lucas and these guys, they'd know him. Oasis was probably the biggest band in the world at the time. So I pulled the old iPod out and I'm playing him some songs as we're flying over. And he's saying things like, fuck, don't look back in anger. Where was this when Essendon sacked me? What a song. Gee, these guys I said, look, so that he might be in the suite. There's two quick rules they've given us. Don't ask for a photo and don't talk to him about his brother.
Right.
Because he and Noel have had this massive breakup and, so you can't talk to him about that. And then we get into the suite and he's not there at the start and introduce ourselves around, and then suddenly comes breezing in with this massive glass of champagne and he's announced himself, and then he got introduced around to everybody. Are you allowed to swear on this? I bet I've sworn a couple of times.
Fuck yeah.
Oh, Daniel.
So he says to he walks around, he's introducing himself to everyone, and he says to Sheeds, "Are you the fucking manager?" And Sheeds goes, "Yeah, well, we call it a coach, but yeah." He goes, "Right." He said, "How'd you know that?" He goes, "Because my security guard is from Australia. He's from Western Australia, actually." And Sheeds goes, "Why have you got an Australian looking after?" And he said, "Because if a fucking fight breaks out, I want an Australian with me." And he said, "Yeah, fair point." He said, "Well, he says he knows your game. How fucking good were you?" And Sheeds says, "Oh, it was okay." And he said, and Gallagher said to him something like, "Did you ever play in front of 300,000 in Brazil?" And Sheeds said, "No, the best I ever did was 100,000 a week for 22 weeks for 27 years at the MCG. Did fucking Oasis ever do that?" and Gallagher says, he's got his champagne, he says something like, "Fucking touche." And then he walks away. We watch the rest of the game. These guys are getting like a house on fire. And I think it was Man United went up 1-0 and Man City scored the equaliser and Gallagher threw himself over the balcony into the crowd.
What?
And it wasn't a huge drop, but it was reasonable.
Because they're Man City guys, right?
Yeah. And so he's bounced out and he's come back up and it's half time. And he's talking to Sheeds and he says, "We should get a photo." He asked for a photo. So we got this photo with Sheeds, and then everyone was you could hear a pin drop, they're chatting away, and Sheeds says, "How's your brother going?" And I'm like, "Oh no, what are you doing? Didn't we agree on that?" And Gallagher said, "I'll fucking tell you how he's going. He's in a box over there with Tom Cruise, and I'm here with you geezer." So funny. And then Cruise was in town promoting his Mission Impossible film. And he said, look, you want to know how my brother's going? We're getting offered a lot of money to get back together and play again. Sheed says, no, I don't care about your music. I don't even know it. I'm just saying life's short, mate. Build a bridge with your brother. You've got to get back together. You need to, and do it out of the spotlight. Just reconnect, mate. I've dealt with my own family and I've dealt with a lot of families, and I just think it's a huge mistake you're making. And everyone's like, Gallagher said something like, you know what, I've engaged 5 lawyers and I'm paying them a lot of money and no one's given me any advice as good as that. And then they just got on really well. And it was a bizarre situation to be in. And then the next day, I think Man United won 2-1, and the next day we got to meet Sir Alec Ferguson, and Sheeds had bought him this bottle of wine, Margaret River Red or White or something, really expensive. And on the way into the stadium, it falls through the bottom of the bag and smashes everywhere.
Oh, no.
So he explains it to him when we walk in, and Ferguson says, look, I'm hungover anyway. I didn't need a bottle of wine. And then we sit there for about 40 minutes chatting. It was good. Look, amazing experience to sit there and get involved in.
That's very good, mate.
Good.
I don't know how to bring us back to footy now. That was a bloody good story.
I've got a footy question for you. Someone involved in sort of, executives around the AFL, and you've worked at HQ. Is there any of a chance that AFLX makes a comeback?
Did it get a start? I mean, I felt to me like they didn't quite give it enough of an opportunity. There was
Super Duper League.
It was there's a fair bit of, I assume there was a fair bit of investment behind it. The idea was good in terms of being able to play it on grounds that don't have to be cricket grounds. I'm not sure. It's not a massive priority for the Giants, but I think the concept wasn't silly, that's for sure.
I've got a couple of quick fire. Sort of on that a little bit. I mean, we're in a massive state of origin. State of origin was a couple of nights ago. Does that? Where do you sit on the state of origin?
Yeah, I'd play it.
Yep.
I'd play it. I don't know how frequently you play it. I think we've got to reach a point, even at under 18s at the moment. I think it's a bit embarrassing for the game that we've still got a thing called the Allies. Like 54% of Australia, you should be able to field a New South Wales team and a Queensland team. 800 players in the men's comp. There's something like 11 out of Sydney. It's just not enough. You can't call yourself a national game. We've got a national competition. We don't have a national game. But can you imagine in years to come if there was a side out of New South Wales origin that could take on Victoria as an example, or Queensland beats WA or something? I love the concept because we invented it. The AFL actually invented state of origin. The NRL picked it up and it's their showpiece. And when you're living in Sydney, you've been here this week, it just dominates the media.
Yeah.
And there's no room for anything else. Yeah, I like it.
Yep, good. Expansion team, Tasmania. You've been involved in a startup. They asked you about how to do it, and if they asked, would you tell them to go and sort it out yourself, figure it out now that they're a competitor of yours, or where's all that sit for you?
Yeah, they haven't really engaged us too much because I think it's an entirely different challenge. I think it's the right thing to do, starting a team in Tassie, and I think the competition in aggregate sense has the money to be able to do it. It doesn't add enormously to the economics of the competition, but it's just I think it is the right thing to do. It's just a different challenge. I think what's happening in New South Wales and Queensland is we've added 2 teams to try to build up a presence in 54% of Australia. So it's a different challenge, but we're supportive of it.
Yep, good. And last one, I mean, you can talk about this. It was relatively public, I think. We interviewed for the top job at the AFL.
Yeah, we had, I think at the time, Richard Goyder had the headhunter talk to a variety of people.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess that was a process that sort of started and stopped and then got picked up again. I think Andrew Dillon's a great appointment. I've worked with him for a long time. One of the smartest people I've ever met. One of the most decent people. Very humble guy. Cares about the game. I think it's a great outcome. Could have easily been he or Brendan Gale, and he's certainly one that we, in way back when we started these clubs, he was very involved in the Giants in particular, and the son. So he understands what we're trying to do. So he'll be great.
You got anything to finish off for Dave, mate?
I just hope the AFLX is just put up somewhere, as a talking
Pretty sure
point.
Oasis is getting back together, by the way.
Yeah.
Didn't they come out and say if Man City...
I reckon Oasis getting back together is a better chance of seeing AFLX come back. But let's just see.
That's a shame.
Now, usually we finish off with social media, but I've just been through 7 of our questions, and I reckon we've answered almost every one of them, Dave. I'll give you a couple just to finish off. Ninok _.
Did you expect the Giants to make the grand final in their first 10 years?
This is from our audience, Dave.
Yeah, I did because I think we're very, very driven to get those building blocks in place because I reckon to open the market up, that's what we needed to do. So a lot of our decision-making about the club was based on that.
I've got one from John Dawson. Was Buddy Franklin ever a serious chance to come to the GWS Giants?
Yeah, I think he was. I mean, this is actually a good one because there's people at the Swans who say, look, he was never a chance. And I said, well, why'd you offer him 10 million when we offered him 7.2? Because if he was never a chance, you should have offered him 6. So they're just simple maths. But we had some really good conversations with him. We were pretty ambitious about trying to target a big free agent when someone came available. He happened to be the one at the time. We missed out. Probably the irony was we lost Kohler as well. Yeah, we missed Franklin and lost Kohler, but the money we'd set aside, in very quick fashion, Gubby Allen went and secured Mumford, Heath Shaw, and Josh Hunt, and then in the years following, that money was paying for Mumford, Heath Shaw, and Stevie J. So I reckon we got a really strong return. Franklin's been massive in Sydney. He's obviously a super player, but at the same time, one thing that we love is we've played the Swans 3 times in finals and are undefeated. So yeah, it's a good record to have.
You just
slip
man's
that in.
mind works.
Yep.
Very good. Finish off with the Eggman, please, Dave.
How does Dave like his eggs?
You like the eggs?
Poached. Yeah, poached.
Poached.
Is that all you need?
Yeah, that's good.
That's
Well done. Dave Matthews, that's it, mate. Did you have fun?
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I did. Yeah, it's good to chat.
Mm.
Nice to see a Sydney place as well.
Yeah, very good. You can find all our stuff, backchatpodcast.com.au or over at backchatstudios.com.au. Big thank you to Fleet Network who are powering our podcast for season 2023. Our sponsors, Swimply, Whippersnapper Whisky, Margaret River Roasting Co, BlueBet, Shelter Brewing Co, Leadable Cameras. You know that sponsors make the world go round, Dave.
I do.
We love ours. Our VIPs, you can sign up to Patreon for one more question, one more
might
story.
be Jack Buckley related.
Yeah, I'm going to ask about Jack Buckley over at Patreon. Sign up to Patreon, wherever you can find stuff. Great to be with you, Dave. We appreciate you joining us, mate.
Thanks, mate.